Yes, let's continue on with events because they're cool. A lot to go through. You know, we'll try to get through this, but there's quite a bit because there's a lot to events. And yeah, let's see how we do. See how far we get. We kind of already learned some of this already. How to handle events, but we kind of didn't. We kind of glossed over a lot of some things. So worth noting. Again, we're not going to go through all the events, just as you know, the DOM elements or the document API, Windows API. Again, there's a lot to it. To be honest, we could probably do an entire week on events, and even then, there'd probably be more to do, right? So there'd be more advanced stuff to do. But I want to take you through at least the most common ones you might use, especially in this course. But there's a lot. There's more to expand on and kind of research. If you need a certain scenario, a certain case you may want to look at. So one thing I wanted to clarify, to be honest, even myself, when I come across this, I had to look it up because you forget this. When you hear about DOM levels, so this is interesting because these DOM levels are the versions of the DOM. So it's kind of interesting when you see this because in some documentation you'll see DOM level 1, DOM level 2, DOM level 3, and you're like, I have no idea what that is, but it's the versions of the specification for how the document model should work. So similarly, we had HTML1, 4, and HTML5, and those other specifications for CSS. Even for JavaScript, we have ECMAScript and ES6. The DOM itself has a versioning system, a specification, which makes sense, right? But so sometimes, again, when you see these things interchanged and intermixed, you have to remember that it's because there's older ways of doing things and there's newer ways of doing things. So DOM level 4, the spec was posted in 2015. Interesting though, very interesting. Like the on-click methods itself, I use them all the time, and you'll see them still in code. The add event listener is newer and apparently more modern. So when you see DOM level 1, that's the core elements. That's the core elements defined by the document model. Then you have the level 2, which are it adds events to those elements. Hold on, sorry, if you can mute your mic, I hear some feedback. Otherwise, I'll have to mute everybody. Please check your mic. All right, so I'm gonna have to mute somebody. I hear some feedback here. Bear with me here. Let me go back to my. All right, so kind of. All right, thank you. Thank you for that. All right. So the DOM level 3 is level 2, but added more elements and more events. So you know, sometimes when you look at the syntax again, it's like, you know, to be honest, you may be more comfortable with some stuff like the adding the event directly to the element with the dot, the accessor, dot on click, dot on mouse over. I'm so used to that because that's all over jQuery and it's just something I've used for a long time. But apparently, it's not being phased out. It's just maybe not the best practice anymore. But if you feel comfortable in that sense, no problem. You can use it. It's not, there's no, there's best practice, but it's not wrong if it works, right? So handling events, there's that guy on the side there, Game of Thrones. One does not simply replace dot on with dot event listener. So there's the dot on, which is like, it's basically the dot on click, which interestingly enough, I actually thought Game of Thrones was this guy's show, Sean Bean. I only watched that show because he was on it, and then I remember, I'm not going to ruin it for you, but basically, I was very surprised because I had only watched it for him, and then he was gone. So it wasn't actually the Sean Bean show. It was actually much more. I learned that later. I actually went back and watched some of it. So anyhow, that was that guy's meme. Look it up. watched that show, but only watched, I think, up to season 5, I think. When an event occurs, you can create an event handler, which is a piece of code or function that responds. Like we said, we established that. The event handler known as the listener, as we already established, let's say listener listens for the event. The tin can with the string attached, right? Like a connect call. Listener is a function. And again, when we're talking about this stuff, you're gonna appreciate it, because when we go to Node.js, they kind of try to mimic some of this stuff, and they have event listeners, and they have callbacks. They try to copy the web experience, the web paradigm, and they do it in a really cool way, which hasn't really been done before that time. And they do it all in JavaScript. It's super cool. So you're gonna get used to event handlers, event listeners, and how to trigger them. In Node.js, you'll trigger them without a user interaction. You'll just trigger them yourself, and then you get all this kind of server-side interactivity on the server level, like when a file gets deleted, a file gets uploaded, something downloads, some Unix operation happens, like cool stuff. You can trigger a whole bunch of cool stuff, and yeah, we'll get into all that. It gets really cool, interesting. But anyhow, we're going to be reusing this logic that we learned here, so it won't be lost on the UI only. The event listener is a function. Sometimes, like in Node.js, it's called a callback function, which basically gets called when it's triggered. It's called back at some point in time. And again, this function can be it's reusable with an explicit name if it's reusable, meaning that if you don't want to put it inline, you want to reuse it for other things. You don't necessarily put it inside of that assignment. You can keep it as an anonymous function if you only want to use it for that particular click event. Suppose one button was a submit button, and you had just or a reset button on the form, and you just have an inline function to reset the form. You may not use it anywhere else, only on that reset button. But however, if there was something like add 2 numbers, and maybe you needed to use it throughout, that's when you would make a functional expression that can be reused throughout your application, because you may not only want to trigger it on a button click, you may need to use it in some calculation, right? 3 ways. So this is where it gets a little mixed. 3 ways to assign event handlers. The event handler attribute, which it's okay, it's all right. Level 0 event handler, we'll go through each one. Level 2 event handlers. Again, if you saw this, you'd be like, I have no idea what that is, but we'll look at this. So the event attributes. So this is where right inside that button, and you can do this in your lab, that's fine if you're comfortable. You assign it in this way on click, and then you put the function call. But this is inline to the HTML, and as they said, you don't really want to be mixing JavaScript with your HTML elements. It'd be better if you can attach everything in your script file and keep the markup clean. Even with the same rule with CSS, you don't want to mix up. You don't want to put too much stuff inline. It makes for a very messy file, hard to maintain. If you can attach it with selectors and attach this stuff with selectors, and then you have a very clean looking markup. It's very nice. But if you can get it working in this way, it's all good, right? I mean, it's not the best practice, but if you can get it working, the main thing is it works, number one, and then you start looking at the code, right? So the event handlers typically have names that begin with on click, on menu over, on hover, on key press. All these things begin with the on to kind of signify that an event is going to happen on them. The event handler for the click event is on click. So we already established that. So in this way, we're assigning it inline. So if we want to assign it to an HTML element, you can use the attribute. Now, these things are attribute again. If you remember, the type is an attribute, the value is an attribute, on click is an attribute. I encourage you to look at the web docs to see what other attributes there are, because there's many more. There could be required if you're doing validation and things like that. Class, we know class, which is a CSS class. That's how you define it. Right, so let's look at that. We already kind of understood this already. It's just a button. It looks like this. We have our markup, which looks like we use our dev tools. If we wanted to, again, okay, so we click save, it looks like that. If we inspect the elements, there we can see in the DOM itself, there's that functional alert. If we inspect it, the script is right there. Now remember, if this stuff is confusing to you, you can go into your source and you can look at the file a little bit better, right? You can actually use your developer tools and put a breakpoint right here, right? So we can actually see this in action when we click the button. It's going to trigger this on click here. It's going to invocate or trigger that function call. And you can see here, because it's inline, we actually have the invocation like that. So if I click this, you can see now that my breakpoint has happened. It's stopped in this moment of time. There could be a lot more going on we could step through with these panels on the right. We have step over, step into, step out. So this is where you have a lot of nested calls and calls within calls. You can step out of this one, see the caller, and but here we just have one function, so we can't really step out of it, I don't think. It'll just trigger the alert and go back to where it was called from. So we went out and it kind of went back to where the caller, which was the element itself, and we're still in debug mode. We can skip out and we'll continue there. So again, inline is not truly the best because we're mixing JavaScript. This could in fact be a very big function and a little bit ugly. But the disadvantages of that, of having inside the attributes itself, are these. So we can assign it in the HTML attributes, but it's bad practice and should be avoided as much as possible. If you do it, I'm not going to take marks off. As I said before, if it makes sense to you and you can get your assignment or project working this way, I'm fine with that. But just know it's considered bad practice because the event handler code is mixed with the HTML. If you're working as a developer, you know, there needs to be a separation of concern. Sometimes because you may have a designer who only knows about, if you have a UX designer or a designer who deals with CSS and HTML, they have no idea about code. They don't know anything about code. They know about the design. They're artistic. They do really good interfaces and mockups. They're not coders, so they may be using different kind of tools to modify the markup and make it look good. So that you don't want code sitting there. They could mess it up, or their programmer, the program, which might be like something like, I think it's called like Avocado. These things, they do mockups, and you don't want dependencies on your script files being blown away. So in a way, it's good practice to separate it out. Second is timing, right? The element is loaded. So that's an issue we already kind of established, that sometimes we need to put our scripts at the bottom because we're not sure yet of the timing, because we haven't looked at page lifecycle. So timing is a problem, right? If the element is loaded first before the JavaScript code, then when the users interact, it's going to cause error because it didn't attach properly, or the elements weren't there, or this is always a timing issue, right? So when you learn with page lifecycle, you can actually intercept those events in the lifecycle, and then attach things when you know they'll be there. Like for instance, when the page loads, you know that the elements are all there. So therefore you can grab them and attach stuff. But if you put your script in the header tag, it runs first before the nodes are even rendered, and then you have a problem because it doesn't work, right? It doesn't match up. So timing is very big. So this is one of the reasons why they say, well, maybe it's best not to include it. But if you get it working, that's fine. Just know the disadvantages. That's a lot to say. So level 0 event handler. So these are called level 0. This is a version of the spec that was a lot older. So if DOM level 3 they said was 2015, this would be probably like 2000. I'm very familiar with this one. This makes me feel like warm and fuzzy. I feel good with this one, right? This is the one I use so much with jQuery. The onClick, .onClick, and then you assign a function. I feel good with that one because I've used it so much. So the event handler properties like onClick, you can assign it quickly and assign it to a function. In that way, you don't have to do the inline. So again, if you use it this way, if you feel comfortable, acceptable, perfectly acceptable. And you can remove it like this. So this, maybe this is a little bit, this might actually throw some people off, but if you want to like we blanked out the entire DOM node tree by setting it to empty string, you can actually unhook that function by just setting it to null. So therefore you unhook the handler. So if somebody clicks on it, it's not going to do anything. I guess one caveat is the DOM level 0 event handlers are still being used widely because they're so simple and cross-browser support. So they are simple. So like I'm saying, you can use these if you feel good. It's less code, not a problem. Just know the difference, right? So if we have this event handler level 0, it's probably going to do the same deal, right? It's going to trigger that alert. Oh, see, it broke. Why did it break? Now, I bet you it's probably because, let's see. Take a look at the this code itself. All right, so let's see here. All right, so we have input button with a, does it have an ID? No. So right here, as I tried to use a query selector with an ID, which is wrong. So maybe I need to go ahead and add an ID to it because maybe it wasn't working like that. So I broke it on this query selection here. Now maybe I don't even need that asterisk there, but we'll see. All right. Yeah, there you go. Right. So there you go. One reason why you may need to add a an ID. Now maybe I could have just grabbed the input. I could have just said the query selector is so flexible, right? Maybe I could have just grabbed the input, see what that would do. That would work for us. All right. However, you know, that would grab the first, it would grab all the inputs and give you the first one. So that might not be your intention. It may not be what you intended to do because, yeah, it's better by ID, right? It's more explicit to have it by ID. ID is unique. Otherwise, you know, you can dig into it a bit better. Right, and what we're going to say here, we're going to say that, so we're using our selectors, we select it, and then we use the on click. Again, if you do the accessor, meaning the dot, you can see all, and you type on, you should be able to see a lot more than that. Why is that doing that? But there are a bunch more to that on click. Why was that doing that for us? IntelliSense is not giving me all the list of what I need, but there are a bunch more than that. Anyhow, we'll keep it at that. If you need to unhook it, you can just walk up to it and remove the handler in this way. You just set it to null. So now if I go to run this, it should not work because we basically wired it up and then we removed it, and I can click all day and it'll probably give me an error here. Let's see here. Cannot set, okay, well, maybe it didn't like this. It wants this selected to be this. All right, so let's get rid of that error first of all on our console. Right, so now I'm clicking it. There's no error. In fact, it's doing nothing because I wiped out the event handler there. Cool. All right, so that's DOM level 0 event handlers. But then this is the newer ones. Sorry, DOM level 2. My mistake. I was saying level 3. So this is the newer version of how to register and deregister event listeners. Get used to this kind of syntax because you may use something similar when you use Node.js. Just letting you know. Or do they do, or maybe they also have a dot on. I think they have a dot on as well. Yeah, actually they do. They have 2 ways, I believe. But again, it's mix and match. I guess they're saying here that this is a more elegant way of doing it because you can just add a listener. I guess really when you get to it, it's a more elegant way to remove an event handler. So you're basically explicitly saying that, hey, I'm removing you. I'm going to remove, and remember, you can have multiple listeners on one element. So on a button click, we could also have, you know, on hover or something like that. So we don't have to have just one. Was it on hover? Yeah, click hover. Let's look at that. So we can also have, let's see if we can do that. Button.on hover. Is that it? On hover? Something like that. I forget, to be honest. And then I can alert that, alert hover me, hoover me. And we want to get rid of this. I may have forgotten that one, to be honest, but let's see. But anyhow, the point is, let's see if we can get this. Did it work? No. So we can look at events. Is it on hover? Hover? I'll probably get it at the end because I probably hover. On hover event. hover event, something like that, Hoover. Anyhow, I cover it at the end of this section. We'll come back to it then. But anyhow, the point is that you can add multiple, what's it, mouse in? Sorry. Mouse over, something like that. Mouse over. We're gonna look at mouse events in a second. Maybe mouse over. If I mouse over it, no, didn't like that. Mouse in. It's probably something similar like that, but we'll get to that. Anyhow, you can have a whole bunch and you can remove basically one at a time. But by setting it to null, it's it's very unclear what you're doing there. So if you're actually using in this situation, you can see here that we have we're basically doing the same thing. If we go to load up this example with level 2, in the same way, this is not going to work because I have gone through and removed it. All right, so I've removed the function. If I go to toggle this out, and then I should have the onClick working as expected. Oh, what's happening now? So did I select it wrong again? Oh, as you can tell here, I don't have an ID. So I need to put an ID on this button because my select is returning null. There you go, clicked. And then if I remove it now, this will negate what I just did. If I remove event listener, but I basically remove this, let's see what happens if I have a empty function here. What if I did this? Or what if I did another action? What if I did another action like mouse in, right? It should leave the other one unaffected because it's not removing the click handler. So there, that still works because I'm removing another event handler that may be attached to it in that way. So anyhow, that's removing and adding in the other spec, but like the other ones we looked at before, using onClick in this manner is fine. And then if you can get working with this, it's fine, but this is not the preferred practice. So that's what those are. If you see them in the specs, you won't be confused anymore. So the other thing is page load. So now we talked about timing. So this one is a big one. And if I actually couldn't find a document or JavaScript, vanilla JavaScript page load diagram, if somebody could find that, let me know in the channel because I couldn't find one. I don't know why. I just kept finding ASP.NET, which I know very well as well. But anyhow, it's a page lifecycle. And I can show you the ASP one, but it's, especially the older web .NET stuff is really messy. But a life cycle of a page is for our JavaScript has 3 important events. When the DOM content has loaded, so that means the browser has fully loaded all the HTML, all the DOM tree is built, everything is there. Maybe the style sheets are not loaded yet, but it's an event that you could tie into at that point. There's the load event. So in the load event, only the HTML is loaded, but all the other external resources. So it says the page load, it loaded. So it means everything is there. Then before unload and then unload is when the user is going to leave the site. Because sometimes when the user is navigating off your site, you want to maybe grab some analytics off of them. Maybe there's Google Analytics or that other one I showed you. You want to grab why is he leaving from the site and kind of analyze that. One note is the majority are Windows specific, but the DOM content one can be found on window and DOM method. So document and window also have this. Bit strange, but they both have that. And when I mean diagrams, if I look at, if I tried to search for that, it was page lifecycle. You'll end up seeing a lot of .NET, and it looks something like this. I don't want to confuse you. The .NET one's a little bit more ridiculous. This is a ridiculous lifecycle. There's so much going on. It's like it starts, initialization, load. Terrible experience when you deal with postbacks, rendering, unload, right? React also has a life cycle, but I couldn't find the JavaScript one for whatever reason. The normal web, I couldn't find that. Yeah. Anyhow, visualize something like that, but that's not the one we're looking at. But the most important ones here that we're going to talk about is like the load. I mean, content loaded is great. Yes, load, and then before load and unload. So each event is really useful. When DOM content loaded means the DOM is ready. So the handlers can look up the DOM nodes and initialize, because remember we said we were moving our scripts to the bottom of the page. We could actually wire everything up in this event because it's ready. Timing we're controlling time. We're bending time a little bit here. The load event, like we said, all the resources are loaded, so styles are applied. Images sizes are known. Things are known now at this point in time. Before unload is when the user's leaving. He's going to leave off. He looked at a product. He didn't buy it. We just need to get some analytics before he leaves. That's a good place we could do that. Or maybe we need to set a cookie that he had some saved settings. Maybe when he comes back, we might apply them. Actually, I worked on something like that as a pain. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry. Yes.
So if we do not apply remove event listener, I'm sorry, I'm skipping a little bit backwards, but if we don't apply remove event listener, then what is the impact? I mean, what is the importance we have to do that?
You don't need to remove them. That's the thing. Like you can, okay, so here's a scenario where you may want to remove a listener. When somebody clicked on, okay, perfect example. You go to a shopping cart and somebody clicks submit. And sometimes on sites you'll find on a website where they will say, you know, only click one time. We're thinking, right? You want to go to this website, and I look at this Lego thing, and I say, I like this thing. I want to buy it. When I go to checkout, I don't know if this checkout's good.
Oh,
I go to, you know what I'm saying?
We need to prevent the user from clicking again.
Yeah, right, right.
Oh,
Because
okay.
yeah, you don't always, like I said, there's cases, there's always scenarios where you need to do something like that. But like if I click proceed to checkout and I've entered my credit card information, I don't want to have the user to click multiple times and trigger multiple transactions, and he's going to be billed $39.99 like 10 times because he's impatient. So that would be a great time to disable that feature for him. I gotta sign
So
in.
disable default, like the part that we did previously today, will that also help in a similar situation?
The prevent default, yeah, if you want to intercept it, like maybe here was something when we clicked onto here, right? We had a button quick overview, and you'll see when we add to cart, we might want to intercept the page redirect and put the loading screen up, right? I think we have a loading screen here. Oh, right here. Sorry, if I click continue, if I click view cart, this loading panel, right? Because we don't want the page to redirect completely. We want to show a loading panel because maybe in behind the scenes, there's other things loading up. And then when we know everything's loaded up, then we control the flow and navigate, right? So yes, it depends what you need to do. If you need to intercept things, I mean, this is more complicated, but you have all these tools in the toolbox, and there's certain situations where you may need them and you may not. For your guys' case, in the assignment, you have to play with some things and see, like for instance, if you're using a form and you click submit, well, you may not want the page to refresh. You may want to stop that propagation, and you want to control what happens in that page, whether it be adding or removing from a list of music items. And again, you may not want to remove. So if you don't remove the listener, it's perfectly fine. You may not need to remove this listener. It's perfectly fine if you just add them and leave them, right? So the situation is only when you need it, like preventing multiple clicks, you remove it. But yeah, no problem. But for our purposes, unless you're playing a game where you find a scenario where you don't want somebody to keep clicking, you may remove it and only allow them to give one click. But for the most part, there is no harm in leaving the event listeners listening. It's perfectly fine. It's only if you want to prevent some tragic, tragedy like being billed 100 times for, something like that. So you can certainly not remove them. It's not required to remove anything you add. You can certainly have your entire page listening forever. It's no problem to the browser because they only get fired when it gets triggered. it's not really that costly unless you have 100 listeners on a, like in the guy's example where you put the listener at the top of the parent, then that's a very, very performant kind of thing. All right, so we'll look at this life cycle here. So yeah, so how you would add it, you could add a listener in this way to the document, and you add listeners for the DOM content loaded, when it loaded, before it unloaded, and unload. So it's just basically showing that you can add. So if I look at this 1 second, I'm about to be interrupted, guys. All right, I got a little candy delivery. So yes, that's what that was, a candy delivery. Sorry, I don't have enough to share, but if I look at at least I have the mic to mute it. Otherwise, you guys would be hearing some comedy. All right, so this is has nothing to look at. But if you inspect the DOM here, you can see here the DOM is fully loaded, the page is loaded. If I try to navigate away, let's see what happens if I go somewhere to Google. Let's just see here. If I enter that, will it capture that? Okay, you didn't even actually see that it happened, but anyhow, we can dig into the, so you'd have to capture something like that. So we didn't actually console log it, that's probably why. So anyhow, I added listeners when the DOM content loaded, the DOM is fully loaded. I added a listener to when the page loaded. Cool. Here, let me actually, so there's some information on clearing these things. I didn't have to do that, but I could say before unload, get rid of this one here. And then console log dot unload. Let's see if we can grab onto it, right? We may not be able to grab onto it unless we put breakpoints on there. Let's see it again. So we refresh our screen, and if we want to navigate away, oh, you didn't see it, but it did actually do it. So let's use our breakpoints. Let's inspect these and put breakpoints in at each moment in time when everything is happening now. So if I refresh, it hits this first one. The DOM is ready, meaning we don't have many elements in there, but you would see, and I could put an element in there and you see it. All right, the next one, page is loaded. Okay, now these other ones don't fire right at this moment until I want to move away. So if I go to click away, you'll see right there, right before it's going to unload, it says before unload. I don't know why I have this prevent default in here. I probably just added that. I think I wanted to do something else. If I skip through it, it didn't actually capture the other one, but you can see how now when I go back, it's actually capturing each moment in time before the page loads. So you can add script. So you could add all your event handlers in this loaded method here, because at that point in time, you have all the elements, all the styles, everything you need. But if you don't need the styles and some other things, you could certainly add it in this DOM content loaded. And then maybe if you wanted to capture some user information or set a cookie or something like that, you could do it when he's about to leave. But you have control, so you have control. So if you think back, way back to some initial JavaScript, we had to use the page refresh to trigger things, right? Now you can see more, we have more control over things. We don't need necessarily to refresh our page anymore. We can do a lot of things and control things, right? But you didn't know that at that time. So now you can appreciate it because you've gone through the pain, and you probably were thinking, why do I have to keep refreshing? Well, hopefully you won't have to after today. All right, so let me know if you cannot hear this. Oh, I'm gonna try to navigate away. Let me know if you can't hear this. I'm gonna play this guy again.
Hey everybody, if you're trying to learn the latest in web development, Udemy has a huge selection of online web.
Yo, what's going on guys? You're watching JavaScript for Beginners lesson 41, and in this video we're going to look at the window onload event. Alright then guys, so in the last lesson you saw me do something a little bit like this, where we had a show more button, which when clicked expands this content, and then we can click it again to zoom that back up. Now, I want to change one thing in this HTML, which is going to have a drastic impact on this functionality. And that one thing is to take this script, which is currently at the bottom, and pop it in the head. Now, I've always said pop your scripts at the bottom, and the reason is because when your HTML loads, it loads in order from top to bottom, and you want to make sure that everything in your HTML is loaded before your script is loaded, because your script may go into your HTML and try and find elements. All right, so let's save this now it's in the head and refresh over here. You see, now it's not working, and the reason is, as this HTML is loaded, it finds the script, jumps into that, and then right here we're saying document, get element by ID, content. And that isn't there yet. It's not been loaded because in the HTML we're only up to here and the content div is right here. So that's why I always say put these down here. But in some cases that's not possible. And in other cases you just like to pop your scripts in the head. I don't know. Even sometimes though, when you have this right down at the bottom, by the time it gets here, sometimes your HTML could still be loaded as it loads down more resources when you get larger HTML files. All right, so what I'm going to do is show you how to overcome this by introducing the window.onload event. All right, so let's jump into the test.js and let's say window.onload, and we'll set that equal to a function like that. And that there, my friends, is saying grab the window object in JavaScript, and the window object just represents this browser window. And we're saying when that window has fully loaded, so when all HTML tags have been loaded in, then fire this function. But until then, do nothing. All right? So it's going to fire everything within this function after everything in the HTML has loaded. So what we could do if we wanted to is grab all this, and we could copy and paste it into there. Save that, refresh over here, and this should work. Yeah, it does. But this is not the way I like to work. I think this is a bit untidy, and if you have many things firing on the onload event, then you're going to have different scripts down here. I like to keep things organized, so I'm going to take that back out again and paste it up here. And what I'm going to do is create a new function, and I'm going to call this set up events. And this function's primary purpose is to set up all the events that I have on this web page, right? And right here we're setting up these events on the button and the content. Well, just the button, but we're going after the content after the window has loaded, right? So we'll grab all that and we'll paste it in here, just like that, so that when this function is called, then it will go out and grab those elements and then set up this event on the button. Now we don't want any of that to happen until the window has fully loaded. So what we do is we come down here to this function when the window has loaded, and we call this function that we've created at the top, set up events. That's all I'm doing. I'm just calling this function after the window has fully loaded, and then it's going to set up all our events for us, which is this one on the button right here. Okay, so that's the way I kind of like to organize things when I'm setting up events in JavaScript. So I'll save that, refresh over here, and now it still works and everything's nice and organized in our document. Okay, so that is the window.onload events, guys. We use it to make sure that we don't fire any JavaScript until the window has fully loaded. You don't have to use it for every single bit of JavaScript that you write, only when you write JavaScript that depends on all the elements being loaded in like this. All right, so there we go, guys. If you have any questions, feel free.
All right, yeah, very common pattern. You'll see it quite a bit. I've used it many times, and you may have run into issues in your other labs because you're wondering, why do I have to put the script tag at the bottom? Sometimes I get an error, right? But you realize if you put the script tag at the header, it's not going to work all the time. You put it at the bottom of your HTML. Sometimes it works, sometimes it may not work, right? So this way you can actually control it. If you need to grab elements, apply handlers, you can ensure if you wrap it in the onload that everything is there when you expect it to be there. So If you had problems before, it's because of timing, right? So anyhow, that's that. If you run into that, you may have an aha moment right now. Again, so you learn by pain sometimes, right? So we're gonna try to go through some of these events. Let's see how we get, because it's a lot to take in. There's a lot more today because it's such a good topic here on events, so we want to cover it all. So I think, do we hopefully, let me open this one here. Oh, is this the, oh yes, this is the, so this is the page. So if you look at this, this is actually the ASP.NET lifecycle. That's what is the trick. Yes, this one is more complicated than the web one. This is the one you'll see, yes. So when you search it, this is, you got to look at this ASP.NET. So this is a lot more other things. This deals with a server rendering kind of thing. So we don't have to worry about some of that stuff. And it's very different from the web, the browser one. So yeah, I couldn't find it myself if you had a hard time. If somebody finds one, it'd be great. But you can visualize, basically it's DOM is loaded, and the load and the unload and the before unload. Anyhow, so now we're getting into, so we know how the page works now. So this is where it gets really cool. Now we can start to track and wire up the user action, which is where things would get cool. So we have all the mouse events. So we can now start to set up listener for elements on mouse events. So these are when mouse events fire when you use the mouse to interact with any elements. These are level 3 events, define 9 mouse events. I'm going over 3 of them now, but there's mouse down, mouse up, and click. So we're basically trying to, when you do a click, so when you click an element, there's no less than 3 mouse events that are fired. Again, these things are fired in behind the scene. We're only grabbing the click event at the bottom there, but it is actually tracking the movement of the mouse, the interaction through your keyboard, your mouse wire into the input. The browser is actually able to detect it. So when the mouse down fires when you depress the mouse button on the element, mouse up fires when you release it, and the click fires when the mouse down, and when one mouse down and one mouse up is detected on the element. So that's how they figure out you clicked it. It means that you pressed and you unpressed, so that's a click. Interesting. If you depress the mouse button on the element and you move your mouse off the element and then release it, then it doesn't click. That's interesting. So it won't fire. So if you drag it and then unrelease on another element, it's not going to trigger that click. Likewise, if you depress the mouse button and move the mouse over the element and then release it, only the mouse up fires. So anyhow, there's different ways it detects it. In both those cases, the click never fires. Best practice, again, we already looked at click, I think, a lot. So, but this is, again, the three ways to do it. Best practice is to do the add event listener. If you're comfortable, which I am totally comfortable to on click, like in this way, this is just so quick for me, perfectly fine. And again, legacy systems, you will find a lot of inline. I look at some code I did years ago, some systems I still support. I have everything inline like this because this wasn't around before then, and then this one was actually really crazy. So like I just put it inline and that worked for me. Legacy, but still works. 3 ways. There's the mouse over that fires when the cursor is outside of the element. Mouse over when the cursor is outside the element, and then moves to the inside of the boundaries. Mouse out when the cursor is over an element, then move to another element. So you can mouse enter when the cursor enters the element, and mouse leave when it leaves. So there's a lot of things going on there. If we look at a mouse button here, so it can detect all these buttons here, the event. So it actually knows the scroll wheel is 1, the right button is 2, the backward movement, I guess the back button here, it's 3, and the forward button's a 4, and so it has a way of, it has a code to each one of these to understand which one it is. So if the event object passes to the mouse event handler, that called the button indicate which mouse button was pressed on the mouse to trigger the event. The mouse button is represented by a number. So I think I have an example of a mouse event here. If I can load this one up. All right, so this one is basically saying to me or you, let's look at this here. If I console log anything, click me with any mouse button, left, right, or middle. Well, I only have my laptop here, so it's like if I left click it, it'll actually say that. Sorry, if I right click, says the right mouse button was clicked. Then if I click with the left one, it'll say the left was clicked. I don't actually have a middle one, but it would if I had a special mouse. I'm actually using the laptop keyboard, so I just have the keypad, so I'd probably missing out on a lot of functionality. But in the same way, it's the same thing set up. Right, so it looks like a little bit more code here, and I have it still in my script. So I have a button here that looks like this, and I have an element I'm going to attach something to. It's a big switch statement here, and it's a bit messy. Not messy, but if it hurts your eyes, again, we could clean it up. So we disable the menu when the right button's clicked. So we're basically, actually probably don't even need this part here. So mouse up, so we're doing the mouse up. On mouse up, we're saying, grab this message, and then we're gonna find out which button was clicked by that. The button has a number on it. So it's gonna be 0, 1, 2, or break. Based on that, we're gonna set the content of that node based on what button we clicked. So it's going to either say left button was clicked, middle was clicked. I don't have a middle, right button was clicked. Otherwise, an unknown button. I don't know what it was. So if we attach a look at the source, if we refresh it, let's refresh it, and we put a breakpoint right here. You see, we wired it up in one shot. We didn't have to do that. We could in fact extract all this and put it into its own function if it's cleaner for you. But this is inline, and it uses another syntax here we're not familiar with, but let's look at this here. If I right click, it'll trigger, and we'll see here it's grabbing this element up here because we want to add a message to it. And then in the button, it's going to say number 2. So number 2 is going to fall through my switch statement, and this is going to say the right mouse button is clicked. And then if I continue on, it'll actually have this element here has been updated. If I click it with the left button as well, the same deal. It's going to grab that selector, that item. It is a 0, so it's going to fall through to that case there. It's going to say that was the one that actually was clicked, and then therefore we have that break statement, and it's going to break the switch statement and not fall through to the default. And then we'll get that message there. Let's see, in fact, if we didn't have that break statement, what would happen? Would it actually hit the default? Let's see. If I refresh this and I do a left button click, goes through here. It doesn't break. Now you see I'm falling through all the cases here. So it was supposed to break here, but now I've gone through the other case. And now it says the middle button is clicked. So that's not what I want. So that's why a break is really important there. But anyhow, as I said, you don't need to do it in this way. If you wanted to, if this is confusing to you, you could extract all of this out and rewrite it in a different way. Right, we could have a function here saying handle mouse, whatever, that's a function. I may need to have to rewrite this a little bit for you as a function, and I have to get rid of this syntax here, which is called an arrow syntax. We'll learn that in ES6. But anyhow, I could create a nice function like that, and then I could make sure I close it properly. My IntelliSense. Okay, you can tell here that this parentheses is matching this one here, so I need to close the top one there because it's unmatched. So I need to do one more, and you'll see it kind of highlight. So I have that closed, and then I close this out, and now I can just do this. I can say handle mouse in that way, so it's a little cleaner, and it should all work in the same way. Right. So if I right click, same deal. Right. Just organize it differently. So those are mouse buttons. Those are detecting the mouse buttons. So that is pretty cool in itself, mouse buttons. So, but at the same time, we can also target keyboard events because we may need to target when the key is pressed or what kind of key is pressed. If the enter key is pressed, maybe we'll want to, and there's another scenario. We may not want to allow a form to be submitted by an enter key. So we check for the enter key and then end the propagation or stop the default. Basically, stop the form from submitting on enter. We don't want them to click enter, the enter key. We want them to click the submit button. So that would be another scenario why you would want to stop the prevent default behavior. All right, we're getting there. We're getting there. Hold on for just 1 second, please. I just traded my Sour Patch candies away. So anyways. All right. So I'll eat that later. Keyboard events. So you're firing keyboard events as you're typing. The key down, the key up, the key press, key down fires as you would expect. It fires repeatedly while you hold down the key. When you release up, the browser knows it tracks it, you've released up. The key press fires a keyboard character like A, B, or C, left arrow key home. And right, the key press fires repeatedly when you hold it down. Interesting. I didn't know that it actually fires. So again, you can add listeners in the same way. It's the keyword here that you're actually, all of these examples look the same. If you notice, what's changing is this key, this what do they call it again? The event name, I guess, the internal event name. So this is what's changing, but it's the same setup, right? And you can see here, this button has multiple event handlers on it for key down, key press, and key up. And if we look at that example here for keyboard events, let's see what this looks like here. And we'll take a look at this one. So we have a text box. Doesn't look too interesting, right, about it. You may be on a site and you may not know that things are being tracked. Okay, it's not liking something here. What is it saying to me? There's an error I have to debug on the fly here. It says, I cannot read add event listener of null. So it does not like my selector again. Probably because, what did I do wrong? Let's see here. Did I do something wrong here? May have done something wrong. Refresh it. Let's see. I cannot find. I cannot find. Maybe I'm having the issue with my DOM not loading in time. But anyhow, let's see what, maybe we can talk through it here. Why is it not finding it? So at this point in time, when I wire it up, I'm adding this whole case. Where am I? I'm in the wrong page. I'm sorry, my bad. I was looking at the wrong page. It's probably, okay, here we go. Oh, okay, so we do have this. All right, so here I'm trying to do document, got element by ID. I probably thought I was using query selector. I should not have that hashtag because I'm trying to think of, I'm in CSS right now. Right, so if I remove that, I should not get that error. Yes, I don't get that error, good, okay. All right, and I can see I outputted this text box. All right, we're back on track. So if I type on this, if I type A, you can see down, I triggered key down, key press, key up. If I type B, same thing. What if I press enter? Same thing. What if I hold my enter key down? It's going to keep firing like crazy. Look at that. So and when I release it, it stops. So if I just hold enter down, it'll keep firing. If I release it, it stops. And then, of course, as I'm typing, right, it's going to keep firing as I'm typing, right? As I'm typing. So it's triggering. So that's what we want. So same deal is we go walk up to it, grab it, and we basically just add these 3 listeners and we console log each. So we could actually, I guess, console log the event dot, now what was it again? Target? No, there was, I forget the element. I guess we'll look at it in a second here. Oh, key code. All right, key code. So I want to see what key it is. I want to see that change because I'm interested in this. So A, 65, B, 66, C, 67. If I hold enter key down, enter key is 13. Right, so you may find logic in some places where they say, okay, if it is equal to 13, then do something. That's basically saying if it's the enter key, then you might need to do some crazy logic or suppress. For us, we're just going to say enter key is pressed, something like that, right? Because you might need to do something or prevent default behavior on an enter key. Let's refresh that. So as I'm typing, doesn't matter. I hit the enter key, boom, says enter key is pressed. So okay, this scenario exactly in this search engine here, we actually trigger off the enter key. So as somebody is typing into this, right, whether or not they select something in this pull down by click, or they click this element here, this click button that fires a search, or if they hit enter, it also fires a search. It fires that search, but we get analytics on each event, whether they press enter, whether they press click, and what they did. How did they interact with the search bar? We have metrics around all of it. Yes. All right, so we're going along here. Let's break it up again. I'm not going to make it through all the slides, but let's play a video on this one here just to get another perspective. Give my voice a break.
Yo, what's going on, guys? You're watching JavaScript for Beginners lesson 40, and in this video I want to show you an example of the on-click event. Alright gang, so as you can see, I've created this simple web page on the right, and all it is a content box with some paragraph tags in it and a button at the bottom saying show is beyond that 270 pixel threshold right there is going to get hidden. That's this thing right there.
Sorry, I thought we watched this already, but we didn't.
And inside that is just a few paragraph tags, nothing fancy. Underneath that, we've got the A tag with an ID of show more. That's this button right here. And then finally, we've just got our script tag there with the test.js script linked up. So absolutely nothing fancy here, dead simple HTML. And the CSS is pretty simple. Just a few styles for the body and the content box right there to get it looking nice and neat. Then some for the button to make it blue and central, etc. The cool parts are this thing right here and these rules right here. So currently, as it stands, this content ID box right here has a max height of 270 pixels, right? That's this height right here. And I've said that the overflow should be hidden. So anything in this box that is beyond that 270 pixel threshold right there is going to get hidden. That's why this box is only 270 pixels high, even though the paragraph tags would potentially go on down here. All right. Right down here, when that content box has a class of open applied to it, then the max height will expand to 1000 pixels, which is somewhere down here. So all this content down here that's currently hidden will show. And the cool part, guys, is this. We've set up our transitions right here and right here so that when that height does expand and shrink, then it's going to do it smoothly. That's really cool. So that is the CSS in a nutshell. I'm not going to go into any more detail about that right here. If you want to learn more about CSS, I've got a whole playlist on that. Go and check that out. For the rest of us, we're going to jump into this test.js file and start coding up this functionality. Alright then guys, so first things first, we need to grab these two elements, the content box and the button, and we need to store those in two separate variables. So we'll do that right here. We'll create a new variable, call that content, and set it equal to document.get element by ID, and the ID we want is content. So we'll store that one in a variable. The second one is going to be called button, and we'll say that is equal to document.get element by ID again, and this time the button has an ID of show more. So that there, my friends, is our two variables storing these two elements. Cool. Next thing we need to do is attach an event to this button right here. So we'll do that by saying button.onClick, because that's the event we want to listen for, and then we'll say that's equal to a function, and within that function is where we're going to control this animation behavior of this box expanding. All right, so within here, basically, we want to check if this box is already open, then we want to shrink it. if this box is not already open, then we want to expand it when the button's clicked, right? Simple enough. So we can do that using an if statement. So we'll say if, and then content dot class name equals open. Then within here, what we want to do is shrink the box. So currently what I'm saying here, guys, is that when you click that button, do this function, and then first thing we're doing is an if statement to check if the content class name is open, right? So if this has a class of open, it means it's already open and expanded down here. Then if that's the case, we need to shrink the box back up when this button's clicked. Otherwise, else, we need to expand the box, right? Expand the box. So to expand the box, all we need to do is give this a class of open, because in the style, when this has a class of open, the max height is 1000 pixels, and it will transition down to that height that the P paragraphs take up. All right, so let's give that a class of open. We'll say content.class name equals open. So we've given that a class name of open so that this expands down here. Now, if it's already open, we want to shrink it so we can take away that class name, and then the content box will revert back to this max height of 270 pixels, and everything overflowing is hidden, so it will zoom back up here. So let's take that class name away. So we'll say content.class name equals nothing, like that, an empty string. Okay then, so there's one more thing we need to do, and that is change the text of this button when it's down here. Because if this content box is already expanded and showing more, we don't want the button to say show more anymore, we want it to say show less, right? So we'll do that right here. So we'll say when we expand the box, we also want to change the text of this button. So we'll say button, that's this element right here that we've stored there, and we'll say inner HTML equals show less. Cool. And then we need exactly the same for when we click the button again. We want to change it back to show more when it closes again, right? Save that, and that there, my friends, should do the trick. So let me just refresh this page right now. Click the button, show more. It's going to zoom down there, show the rest of the paragraph tags, show less, zoom back up, show more, show less. Pretty cool, right? So just to run through it again one more time, we've stored these two in two separate variables, content and button. Then we've applied the onClick event to the button right there. And we've said that when this is clicked, fire this function. And this function says if the content box right here has a class name of open, then we're going to shrink the box. And if it doesn't have that class name of open, which it doesn't currently, then we're going to expand the box. Now to expand the box, we're just giving it that class name of open, and in the styles, when it's given that class name of open, it's going to expand the maximum height and do it smoothly via these transitions. And then it's going to change the button HTML to show less. That's why we get this text change there. Otherwise, when it's open, as it currently is, when I click it again, it's going to take away that class name so that it reverts back to 270 pixels max height, and it's going to change that button inner HTML again to show more, which changes right there. All right then, guys, so if you have any questions about this whatsoever, feel free to comment down.
That's cool. So what makes it really easy is makes it really good is when you have the CSS done for you, which you know, the complexity goes up when you have to do the CSS, obviously, but sometimes this is a development course, so it's not a designer course, so we didn't spend a ton of time on CSS. You know, in my current, if I'm lucky in a role, then somebody does the CSS for you and kind of pushes it down, right? Let me try to get through 5 minutes here, and then we'll let you work on a lab. I just want to get through this so we can, so it doesn't carry over too late. All right, so we have the onClick event we looked at. There's also the scroll event. So the scroll event is for the scrolling of the page. You can also tie into that. So you also, when you're scrolling an element, either using the mouse scroller or you're scrolling the page by dragging the scroll bar on the side. So the scroll bar you can use, so it'll fire if you use the scroll bar manually, use the mouse wheel, or you click an ID and you kind of go down the page, like if you use an old school anchor. That's maybe when it happens. So again, same deal. We already know how to set this up. You can use the on scroll, which you're perfectly fine. Again, it's the difference between this is here, you're in this one here, you're actually giving the name of the event here. You need to know the name of it and set it up that way. Otherwise, target element dot, you'll see on scroll in there and you set it up in that same way. If you're wondering what this is called here, it's called an arrow. This is called an arrow function. We're gonna learn it next week. It's actually quite nice. And we'll learn what that is. It's basically a shorthand. It's basically a shorthand. Instead of writing function, you don't need to write function all the time anymore with that syntax. It's super nice. It saves you all that typing. So in the same deal, you can listen to the scroll events on the window object for the whole page, the whole panel. You can put something like that on it, or you could put it on, you can put it in the same way with the on scroll, or you could also put it on a tiny little like text window or something like that if you wanted to. But you can also, so not only on the window, you can also do it on the document.body if you wanted to. If you had like the smaller container that had scroll, you can also listen for that as well. And then again, you can remove it by setting it to null. So I had a small example. I'll let you guys get back to your lab for a little bit anyways. All right, so in this example here, what did I have here? So I have just inner kind of control here. So if I actually, and again, I'm going to put these examples up on the GitHub repository. So if I scroll here, so if I click this, scroll left, it's going to scroll for me. Scroll top, it's going to scroll down. So I'm actually handling I'm actually scrolling quite a bit in there. So I'm actually controlling the scrolling in this one. So as I'm clicking the buttons, I'm actually controlling the scroll. Let's look how I did that. So forget about the styling if that throws you off, really. Yeah, I have two buttons here. I wired them up. So if you can see here, what I did differently here was instead of putting an event handler on each one of these buttons, I put it on the parent one, and I put a click listener on both of them. So now when I click, it has this. It goes through here. It finds that element get by scroll demo, which is right here. This div tag, which is the container, right? Is that whole container with the, and this is the buttons around it with the scroll. So the container has a style that has a scroll on it here somewhere, right here. And I get the target, and then I check the target ID. Is it this button here? Scroll left. If so, then move that container width inside there. So you're basically increasing that element by a number, and scroll top. So we're modifying the attributes in there. And basically, so really what this is doing is this is showing here that we are adding these scroll buttons onto this, and then we are in fact applying the listener to the parent, and then we are checking all of it and then applying some scroll. So yeah, that's all well and good, but if we wanted to actually look at the window, right? So if we wanted to say window.onScroll, if we wanted to do something like this function, and we wanted to put console log dot scrolling, so we want to capture the fact. Let's see if we can do it. Where is it here? It has to have content bigger though, so we'll see if it actually will work for us. Okay, if we refresh here, we want to, let's see if we can do it here. We need a content bigger, so we're not going to actually be able to do this unless I have a lot of content in there. So let's actually go through and why not we just let's make some content here. So I'm going to, I don't know what I'm going to do here. I'm going to post this a couple times, paste this a few times down my screen. I don't have any baked in content here. Hopefully we can get enough here. This is like brute forcing it, guys. Let's see here if this will work. All right, is this enough to actually give us, okay. So we have a scroll bar here because now we have content overflowing. If I scroll, as you can see there, you can see my message here is many of them, right? There's 38 messages. So now I have a scroll panel as I scroll, you can see it's triggering, right? So that's how you trigger the window.scroll. And that's really this listener for the window itself. And you could also attach it to this document as well. If you were scrolling on the inside using these panels, you could actually capture that as well. Now that's the on scroll. A lot to take in, but I think this stuff is more fun than just functions. So I'll let you guys do a little bit